On to Israel. Israel just held its third national election in a year, and again Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing bloc, led by his party, the Likud party, has come out on top. They have, the last time I checked, they had 59 seats, too short of a majority in the Israeli parliament, and his inability to get a majority is mainly down to the right-wing political leader Avigdor Lieberman, who withdrew his support for Netanyahu, who has been an adversary of Netanyahu for a long time now, and who actually tried to sabotage, in a way, Netanyahu's victory by coming out with revelations before the election that Benjamin Netanyahu had held secret talks with Qatar in order to make sure that there are deliveries of aid and financial support to the Palestinians in Gaza. However, it is still considered a victory for Netanyahu. He might declare a minority government and still have enough seats with the parties in his right-wing bloc to get past most of the legislation that he wants. Or he could reconcile with Lieberman, whose party took 7 seats in the election, and establish a majority, which seems to be the natural thing to do for both men. Now, when it comes to the Israeli left wing, the blue and white movement that was led by Benny Gantz, they need to perhaps look to reinvent themselves in order to start appealing more to the Israeli public. Now, they didn't perform too badly in the election. They got 54 seats, just a couple of seats less, 5 seats less than the right-wing bloc. But in order for them to get the majority, they would need to encourage Lieberman to support them. Lieberman plays the role of the kingmaker in this situation, but Lieberman, being right-wing himself, is very unlikely to give his support to the left. He's more likely to give his support to Benjamin Netanyahu. However, there is a lifeline available for the Blue and White Party, and that could be by joining up with the Joint List, which is a pro-Arab party in Israel. They enjoy the support of many Palestinian Israeli citizens, and they are actually the third biggest party in the Israeli parliament. They took 15 seats. So if the Blue and White left-wing alliance was to join up with the Joint List, they could actually achieve a majority and establish a new government. However, we have to keep in mind that we are speaking about Israel here, and one of the core elements that all parties besides the Joint List promote, one of the core ideologies, core ideals, is that they're all Zionist and they are all pro-Israeli. Now, the Joint List being that they are made up of Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians, they don't subscribe to this ideology. They do not support Israel as a state, and they are by all means pro-Palestinian. So most parties in Israel are reluctant to have any affiliation with the Joint List. It's something that they do not want to do. They do not want to be seen as pro-Palestinian, because that would probably mean that they would lose the majority of their voters. So even though the Blue and White movement does have this opportunity to make an allegiance with the Joint List and to become a majority, they probably would not take that opportunity, because they would prefer to be an opposition party than to team up with a pro-Palestinian party. That being said, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, what happens with him, even if he does establish a majority, is still not very clear, because on March the 17th, Benjamin Netanyahu actually faces trial for corruption, and it is likely that if he is found guilty, he may be called to step down, to resign. He may actually have to serve a term in prison. So with him being re-elected as Prime Minister, if he remains Prime Minister, there's a higher likelihood that he will avoid a prison term because of political reasons, behind the legal structure. He may be more likely to survive his trial. So for him, being re-elected as Prime Minister was something that he personally needed to achieve to stay out of prison. But I'm not saying that he's not going to prison. He may be, if he's found guilty. We have to keep in mind that whatever your opinion of Israel is a country of law. If he is found guilty, he may have to step aside, and somebody else from his right-wing bloc, from the Likud party, may have to take over as Prime Minister. So that's a bit ambiguous right there, what's going to happen regarding Netanyahu. But one thing that is for sure is that the Israeli right-wing has shown that it does have the support of its people to continue upon the trajectory that it's been set on. And that trajectory, as we have seen in Donald Trump's Middle East, in his words, peace plan, is set on annexing parts of the West Bank and really denying true Palestinian statehood and a equally beneficial peace deal with the Palestinians. And it seems to be working, because it seems that even the Arab countries in the Middle East are starting to turn their favor towards Israel. And with Qasem Soleimani out of the way and Iran's influence in the Middle East getting capped, even pro-Iranian proxies such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip are starting to realize their limitations when it comes to fighting Israel. After some skirmishes in Gaza earlier in February, Islamic Jihad decided to call a ceasefire and to keep the peace in Gaza, because they realized that they could not take on Israel militarily. So this situation has really forced even the Palestinians themselves to reassess what kind of approach they're going to take for challenging and for campaigning for Palestinian rights in future with Israel. And again, on another side note, I just want to mention that earlier in February, that Benjamin Netanyahu, he actually secured some kind of deal with Sudan after meeting with the Sudan Sovereign Council Chief Fatah al-Burhan. Now, keep in mind that Sudan has also undergone recently a regime change. Sudan traditionally has been very much opposed to Israel, has been a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, of Islamic movements, of the Palestinian people. But now with its former leader, Omar Bashir, having been overthrown, and a new military regime starting to take control of Sudan, we're seeing a change in Sudan. We're starting to see a Sudan that is willing to work with Israel to the expense of the Palestinians in order to secure its own interests. And this is a strategy that has been led by Netanyahu for many years now. It's a strategy that's working. Israel is starting to gain acceptance and legitimacy among Arab states in the Middle East, and the Palestinian cause is losing steam. The Israeli public are seeing that. The Israeli public support that, and it seems that this is maybe one of the reasons that the Israeli people have decided to vote for Netanyahu, despite the fact that he is likely to go to jail if he is found guilty of corruption in the trial that starts on March the 17th.